So, welcome everyone. We're really excited to have you at our inaugural GRCA's, the Greater Reading Chamber Alliance Economic Development webinar series. We're kicking things off with a really critical topic, funding incentives and public-private partnerships. Um, I'm Erin Gantz. I'm the Vice President of Economic Development and Strategy here at GRCA. And we're really glad that you're here with us and hope that this will be, a valuable and practical conversation today. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge our sponsors, the Berks County Industrial Development Authority. Thanks, Jeremy. The Berks County Redevelopment Authority and Gallagher. We really appreciate their partnership in supporting this inaugural series and helping us bring these conversations to the business community. I'm going to introduce our panelists. Fadia Halma is the Regional Director of the Lehigh Valley Regional Office for the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. She covers Berks, Carbon, Lehigh, Monroe, Northampton, and Schuylkill counties. Jeremy Zaborowski is the Executive Director of the Berks County Industrial Development Authority, and Deborah Millman is the President of the Greater Berks Development Fund, an affiliate of GRCA. And I encourage everyone to take a look at the event page that has really in-depth bios of our panelists here today who have really extensive experience in our funding community. So we're going to get started. I'm going to ask each panelist to provide a brief overview of their organization, their role, the tools they offer, and how they support projects in our region. And Fadia is going to kick us off, and we'll be sharing slides. So you can just tell us when to advance.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development is responsible for economic growth, business development, and community revitalization across the state. Our core mission of what we try to accomplish every day is really to foster opportunities for businesses to grow and for communities to thrive. Um, I would say our core responsibility is business development and job creation. We do that by attracting new companies, supporting existing employers, and really encouraging entrepreneurship through various tools, business finance, tax credits, workforce development. We also, on the community revitalization arm of DCD, is really work to support grants and support local governments and nonprofits for projects that would strengthen the communities. Examples of that would be our tools for the downtown and Main Street revitalization, infrastructure improvements, and support for distressed communities and neighborhoods. We've just recently launched our housing and community development strategy, which also is geared towards affordable housing development, community infrastructure, and assisting for low and moderate income households. That helps with that grander look at community development. And most of the tools that we have are grants, loans, and tax incentives that we use to help support any type of business expansion, industrial site redevelopment, tourism, technology, innovation. So thank you for having me. I'm so excited to see so many participants today. When you're looking at some of the main programs that we have that are currently open right now, one of the ones I wanted to talk to you about is Greenways, Trails, and Recreation. It is basically there for any type of park, trail space, open space that is available to the public. It even includes public swimming pools. The funding amount is about $250,000, and it is currently open till May 31st. Another one that is really popular is the multimodal transportation fund, and that includes anything from, let's say, streetscapes, sidewalk curbing, lighting fixtures, things like that would help pedestrians get around more safely. You can go to the next slide. And our next one is our newer program. It's called Pennsylvania Strategic Investments to Enhancement Sites, or PA sites. And this program is really around attracting new businesses to Pennsylvania by having shovel-ready sites where there's electricity, sewer connections already there, so that Any new business coming into Pennsylvania has the opportunity to look at the site and then go from there. The funding, comes in different planning grant, or it also can help for construction sites to help development enhance them. It is a very competitive program, but it is also not there for an existing Pennsylvania company to expand. The caveat is that is a new company coming into to Pennsylvania, so we're trying to attract new businesses into BA. You can go to the next slide. One of our most popular tools programming is called the local shares account, and it exists from our gaming funds that we receive through the state. We have a larger one that is the statewide LSA that will open in every year at September 1st, and it goes till November 30th. And then we also have one that's called local shares, and for Berks County, that will open up in July. It is economic development projects, anything that's in the better or greater good for the community, anything that helps create jobs, neighborhood revitalization programs, anything from that helps with libraries, schools, commercial corridors, things like that. Community improvement project. It could be anything from housing to cultural, to the library, to the YMCA, things like that that really help bring in and help the community. And then anything in the project that's in the public interest. And the way LSA or local shares account is written is kind of a broad definition. So if you come to us with a project in mind, we can then help you decide, if it's something that is worth coming in and eligible for a local shares account. And then if you go to the next one, the last one, currently open right now is business in our sites. It is going to be open till July 30th. I'm sorry, June 30th. And it is a wonderful tool that we have to help shovel-ready sites get started. It helps to attract jobs, and the grant amount cannot exceed over a million or 40% of the total combined grant. It is a very successful program, and is another way that we can help build our businesses here in PA. I think that's it for me right now. I'd like to pass it on then.
Thanks, Fadia. Jeremy, you're on.
Great. Hey, everybody, I'm Jeremy Zaborowski, Executive Director of Berks IDA, Berks County Industrial Development Authority. You can flip to the next slide. What I want you to know is when to call me. Now, the short answer to that is call any of us. All of us work together very well. All of us collaborate very well in all of this. When in doubt, call somebody because we're all here to try to bring solutions to the table. But if you want to cut to the chase and want to know what should I call Jeremy for directly, these are the three things. The Industrial Development Authority for Berks County does development, does financing, and does grant and other kinds of support around that. And then I'm going to flip through a number of slides somewhat quickly to give you some visuals and give you a little bit of data so that we can get into the meat of our conversation today. But I really want you to understand this is what we do. This is when you should call us. But when in doubt, you can call me anyway because I can direct you to the rest of them and vice versa. All right, flip into the next one. So let's go through a little bit of the development. So this is Berks Park 183. I'm sure all of you have heard, or many of you have heard me talk about this already. 55 acres is developable, roughly 150 acres for the whole site. We are in the process of donating the portion of that highlighted area between the river and our road, Aviation Road there, to the township for purposes of a park. So that is, we're getting close to the finish line on that. And then we have 3 lots in that site that we are getting through land development right now in order to get pad ready. And in fact, we are using Fadia's Business in Our Sites program at the state that's helping us to get these very hard and challenging sites across the finish line to get redeveloped. We've spent 17 million to date. We have 2 buildings that have been built, totaling 500,000 square feet. They're generating 1.1 million in annual property taxes that did not exist before our work on the site. So it's a real win for Berks County, a real win for the state and what's been done so far. And then the 7 million in business in our sites that I have to get the last three lots, you'll see those coming soon in 2027. In fact, that should say 165,000 square feet, not 160,000 square feet. We got a little bit more yield out of it. All right, if you can go to the next slide. That's what it looked like when we started. I purposely picked a nice fall picture so it looked extra brown. Now we go to the current pictures. You can see what it looks like as of last October. We haven't had a lot of change since then, but we've had the 500,000 square feet get built, the certificate of occupancy get obtained for the building in the foreground. The building in the background is FedEx, which has been occupied now for 3 years. Endurance is the developer for this closer building, and they are waiting for the right tenant. So if anyone has a need, we have 235,000 square feet available right now. All right, if you can go to the next slide. Here's our next project for development. We have Glidden. We acquired that just about a year ago, just over a year ago now. We're finishing out the environmentals for the site. You'll probably see activity on the site already. The 5 acres north of the tracks that subdivides that property is now under lease agreement with Packing Corp. They're using it for trailer parking. We have that on a short-term basis while we develop out the land development plan on the site. But that just helps stabilize our costs for it. On the southern part of the site, Schumann Development Group has already been in front of the City Redevelopment Authority and is in the process of getting their land development approvals for a retail concept on that lower portion. Full reuse of the site is expected to be 2027 to 2030, just depending on when we get land development approvals, environmental approvals, all of those approvals, as we're all so fond and aware of. All right, flip to the next one. We can get into our financing. So this picture is hot off the presses from yesterday. In partnership with Greater Berks Development Fund and Deb, we worked on providing bridge financing for Right Now Our trailers. They just built that beautiful building up on 61 with the red stripe across the top. 400 workers in that site building trailers right now. It's the North America headquarters for Right Now, and they are the largest aluminum trailer manufacturer in the United States. This is an example of bridge financing if you're in the market for it. We can provide on a 2 to 3 year basis bridge financing in a less secured position than others might be willing to do if it makes an economic case for benefiting Berks County and its residents. This was a hit out of the park as far as I'm concerned for Berks IDA, and very glad that Greater Berks brought us in to partner with providing this second position financing to provide them with working capital that was necessary in the process of expanding into this site. Okay, we go to the next financing that we do, tax increment financing. So this one is under construction right now. This has been in the news a lot this week and last week with the Berkshire Mall coming online, and I'm glad to answer questions around tax increment financing in general that anyone may have, but also around specific projects that are taking place in the county. Last year, we closed on $5 million in financing to install water and sewer in Amity Township next to Arrowhead Golf Course. That work was completed, and now we have 340 homes that are getting designed and built in that area. The first 65 will start construction any day now. I just had a call with the township supervisor about when the building permits are coming in. All the streets have been marked, all of the inlets have been put in, all of the stormwater has been put in. If you go to the next slide, you can actually see a nice visual. This was a drone footage just from this weekend after we had lots of rain, so that was good. It told us the stormwater is actually working since we have several lakes now that are all dry now, so it's working, I promise you. But that's where the first 60 homes are going in. So if you have financing problems or financing challenges, tax increment financing, bridge financing, these are all tools in our toolbox that we're able to apply. If you flip to the next one. So in partnership with Berks County, we've created the Infrastructure Loan Fund. We can lend up to $1 million for non-authorities of the county. So your RAWA or townships or boroughs all could borrow up to $1 million. They can be for soft costs or infrastructure related costs for expansion of your infrastructure, not replacing a road or replacing a pipe that's worn out, but expanding that pipe or putting new pipes or infrastructure in is something we would consider. Only 4 million is left. Lower Heidelberg was our first recipient it says last month. I should have updated that to last year, about 6 months ago. And then we have 3 more million in the queue, so we probably only have $1 million left to loan out between now and next year. So if you have a project in your municipality, in your borough, for your authority that will have a clear ROI for Berks County, come and talk to us. It's meant to be, it's mirrored off of the state's program, the state's business in our sites actually. But it's meant to encourage and get over the hump with infrastructure. Flip to the next one. And then RACP grants and grant administration, and we all know about that one. But if you have a grant that you need to have administered, talk to us. We're able to do that. And then that's it for me, and we can flip it over to Deb.
Yes. Thanks, Jeremy. You're up, Deb. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jeremy. And Greater Berks Development Fund and as you'll see, we're fairly similar to the IDA in that our main focus of our work is in financing real estate and development. Jeremy is an industrial development authority. Greater Berks is actually a 501c4 industrial development corporation. So we're formed under different legislation, but have very similar. We were formed in 1947, and our affiliation with GRCA began in 2017 when the Greater Reading Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Greater Berks Development Fund, and a former organization, Greater Reading Economic Partnership, all came under the umbrella of GRCA. We are what is called a certified economic development organization. We are the only one in Berks County. And what that means is we are designated on an annual basis to be the entity to facilitate some of the programs through DCED. And we'll get into a few of those in a moment. But this is a designation that we go through every year, and we've been the CEDO for the past few decades. And again, our focus is projects, real estate and development. And I also wanted to mention that we are, in addition to the financing work and the projects that we do, we also own the Gateway building in downtown Reading at 201 Penn Street. So as you see the Penn Street Bridge, it's on the left-hand side. It's a beautiful 5-story brick building with the silver sculpture in front of it. We also own 606 4th Street, which is GRC's. Next slide. We really did get, although we were formed in 1947, our work and especially our development work and our real estate work began with a project that folks from Berks County will know as the former Lucent project, the former Gear project, Stone Point, and I think is its latest name. And this is a substantial project that we actually built and then leased to the company back in 1959. So this really kind of kicked off the work that we do today. Next slide. So in terms of our financing, we really have three separate programs. So through the Department of Community and Economic Development, we administer something called the PEDA program, which is the Pennsylvania Industrial Development Authority. And, we'll start our acronyms with PIDA. We'll get into a little bit of that in a moment. We administer another smaller loan program called the Pennsylvania Catalyst Fund. And then, as Jeremy mentioned, we are also involved in direct lending, whether it be through some short-term bridge financing that we often partner with the IDA on, or just some direct loans that we'll do for very specific projects. Next slide. So as I mentioned, PIDA. So we are the entity that borrowers will work with in order to submit an application to the PEDA board. So it's a traditional, real estate, machinery and equipment, land acquisition, sometimes working capital, but honestly, it works better for hard asset financing. Next slide. The loans can go up to 2.25 million. It is a 50% match, so we can go up to 2.25, with the 50% being the maximum. Machinery equipment traditionally is in the range of 400,000. If there is a larger project or if it's a special requirement, we can appeal and perhaps raise the amount for machinery and equipment. And working capital is 100,000. One of the nice aspects of the PETA program is that about 15 years ago, the eligibility did expand to agriculture. And this has really been an area that we have done a lot of financing for, especially as it relates to the poultry industry in Berks County. As you know, we're a thriving agricultural community, and what we have found is that oftentimes farmers are approached to use some of their excess acreage from poultry barns to support the surrounding processing plants, and it's really turned out to be a nice stream of revenue, and we are really happy to be able to support that with the community. Next slide. PA Catalyst is a little bit of a new program. This was funding that came through during the COVID years, came through the federal government, now is then administered through the state of Pennsylvania. We are part of a 7-county region led by Chester County Economic Development Council. We are able to administer it's a total of about 2.3 million that we've been able to receive as a county. We have dispersed 800,000 to date. What's nice about this program is that it's for entities such as restaurants. We've used it for the cleaning services. We've used it for some agricultural uses, but sometimes the PETA program does not lend itself for some smaller businesses, and this has been a really nice match to the PETA program. The interest rate now is 5%, and again, we can do a 50% match. Our average loan is probably around 50 to 75,000, but we can go as high as 250, 300. We've even had the occasion to administer a $500,000 grant for a project that really met great criteria. So we're happy that we have this at our disposal because, again, it's a nice complement to it. Next slide. And as Jeremy mentioned, we also have direct lending. The photos below are the project that Alan Schumann did when he purchased the former St. Joe's Hospital. Greater Berks and the IDA partnered on a short-term loan. Oftentimes some of these projects involve various sources of funding, which can at times take some time to apply for, receive approval for, and go eventually make its way to settlement. And because, again, there's often multiple sources, sometimes that short-term bridge financing can really play a critical role in being able to have the projects get underway, not have to wait for every single piece of the puzzle to be solved. And we've been really happy to play a part. We think it's a pretty important way for our organization. Picture on the right is a in-progress picture of Supernatural. We're actually going to be having a full webinar about Supernatural on the project in the year. But again, Greater Berks was able to provide some short-term funding, which really in this case, because the project took a number of years, was again an important role for us to play, and we are looking for other opportunities to do so. Next slide. As Fadia mentioned, the local share account has been a relatively new program for Berks County since we now do have a casino in Berks in the Morgantown area. So we weren't able to take advantage of this funding until we had a casino in Berks County. Greater Berks is an eligible applicant. So, as Fadia mentioned, these funds are available for really a wide number of uses, and it's a nice way for nonprofits who, we traditionally aren't able to match some of our economic development funding with nonprofits, but they are an eligible end user for the LSA money. Fadia already mentioned the timing for both the smaller pot of money for Berks, which is the category 4, as well as the statewide, which is a larger dollar amount. And Fadia, I had that the applications will be due in September for Berks, so I might be a little bit off on that timing, but we have been able to help projects such as the Kutztown Strand, the Hamburg Strand, obtain funding for the Reading Hospital Foundation, the Hamburg State Street project, and we have a number of applications in awaiting for review and approval for this past round. And we are, definitely willing to talk to folks about this program. Kind of now is the time of year where we want to have those conversations. It's a great program. The application compared to some of the other programs is fairly straightforward. Really, the trick with the LSA is timing. So, for example, if you were to submit an application November of 2026, it's likely that you may not hear until almost a year that whether or not you are successful. And so we encourage people to be looking not for necessarily funds that they would need right away, but perhaps there's a piece of equipment or some building renovations that are part of the phase project or that they know will be coming. This is really a great match for that because you can't start the project until you know you've been approved and then receive a grant contract. So again, it's a wonderful program. Really, the trick is to make sure of timing and also the use. It does come with prevailing wage requirements, which, again, is can be a little bit tricky. And so we encourage, again, anybody who would be interested in thinking about some of these projects to give us a call. And really now is the time to start thinking about whether or not you would want to apply for this next round. So, hey, Erin, back to you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for those overviews. I think it's really important to ground our conversation in everybody's background and the range of tools represented here today. So we're going to move into the guided conversation portion of our webinar today and talk about how projects come together. So we're going to start with Deb. From your point of view, can you walk us through how economic development projects actually come together, and what do people most often misunderstand about that process?
Well, even as the three of us were talking, I realized that there's, as with economic development, there's so many acronyms and so many programs. I would say one of the questions we get asked most often is about grants. And grants are a little bit few and far between. So we did talk about the local share account, which is really a unique program. Probably the grants that we work with within economic development typically have a pretty specific use. And the one I'm thinking about in particular is one called the Industrial Sites Reuse Program, which is really geared towards environmental assessment work. And again, there is grant funding available, but it's for a very specific use. For some of the larger economic development projects in the state, there are grants that are available through DCED and through the governor's office, but they're typically for very, very large projects. So unfortunately, when folks call and kind of start the conversation, how much grant funding is there, unless it's really for a very specific use or large project, we usually have to transition into maybe some financing options and things like that. I think one of the things we really try to emphasize in our discussion of economic development is that sometimes projects can take a very long time to materialize. As Karen mentioned, everybody sees the ribbon cutting, the groundbreaking, but sometimes those projects just take, some stops and starts. There can be some obstacles that come up along the way. Jeremy mentioned the Right Now project. The company had purchased a parcel of land about 15 years ago in preparation for eventually building a new plant. As they were getting closer to that, they realized that parcel of land wasn't going to be big enough for what they would need for their new facility. Therefore, transition and purchased a larger piece of property, ended up selling the original parcel that they had purchased. So sometimes, again, these projects don't always have a clear point A to point B trajectory. And we're here to make sure that they're here along the way to help as some of those obstacles are identified and then try to figure out a way to move through them. As with, really, whether it's a small business conversation or some of these larger projects, as Jeremy mentioned, it really starts with a conversation. There's so many programs out there, and as if anyone has gone on the DCED website to look at what kind of programs are available, there's a lot that are listed. And sometimes you'll read, 15 pages of guidelines and realize at the end, oh, I'm not eligible. The funding window they're not taking applications. And so, what we do encourage is to have a conversation, whether it's through GRCA, whether it's through the IDA, whether it's through the county's Department of Community and Economic Development, because I think one of the things we want to do is kind of quickly triage where the resources might be. And, if it's not something that we can help with, or if we think there's a better partner, or if we have to bring a partner in, that's really what we're here for, is, to kind of use our experience and our expertise to make sure that all of the resources are identified and that everyone lands at the spot that they should be. Sometimes the funding and the incentives are really tied to the location. So as you can imagine, with the city of Reading, there's multiple zones and designations, whether it's enterprise zone, is a whole other set of acronyms that are typically found in the city of Reading. And so sometimes the location can drive what's really available in terms of incentives and programs. And then I guess just another caution is that some of funding programs are only open at certain times of the year. So really trying to match up, timing. And again, that's why we encourage folks to talk to someone as soon as possible, because then you can kind of line up what that funding window may look like, what you're going to need for an application and things like that. So,
Thanks, Deb. Jeremy or Fadia, do you have anything to add from your side?
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak a little bit more. I think for me, people often misunderstand how complex and collaborative economic development projects are. It's so much more than just giving money to a project. Economic development is more, it's a development, it's less about funding a project. It's more about building a coalition, and it's structuring the financing and navigating the regulations and, sustaining a community over support for over many years. There's always this, statement, oh, the government just hands out money. That's not true. Or that one agency controls the whole project. That's not true. Economic development has multi-partner collaboration. So when you're coming forward with a project, it could involve the state agencies, it could involve counties and municipalities, or economic development authorities, or nonprofits and community groups, and private developers or businesses. So there's multi-layers to a project. It makes, you're bringing a lot of different stakeholders to collaborate on an entire project from beginning to end. Also, I think it's a misunderstanding that, projects move quickly and funding is approved right away. As Deb had said, it could take up to a year or more from beginning to start when you apply. It could be a full year for when funding is even awarded. Sometimes, projects have to go through environmental reviews or engineering and designs, permitting and zoning, which could take a very long time, procurement rules and contracting and compliance checks. There's many different components that can take a project well beyond a year. Another one that I hear quite often is that funding decisions are purely political. While politics can influence the priority, most programs have strict criteria and scoring systems that are included. Some of the things we look at when we're looking at an application is, job creation or retention, what type of economic impact it's going to have. Is there a community need for the project? How, the applicant is leveraging private investment and what the long-term sustainability of the project could be. So those are some of the things that we take into consideration as we're looking at the applications. Another one, a misconception that I often hear is that economic development only means attracting the big businesses and the big companies, and that's really just not true. Much of the work that we do is community capacity and the quality of the place. Working on the Main Street revitalizations, anything from tourism development, any small business support that we can offer, or workforce development or infrastructure. Those are all things that we believe is really important to the long-term economic growth of a community. Another big misconception is that once we give out the award or the check, the job is done. And that's not true. Anytime it involves the state and grant funding, there's always strict compliance requirements that come along with it, where they have to come back and do detailed reporting or proof of expenditures, or did they meet the performance benchmarks that they thought they were going to accomplish. Sometimes there's audits and documentation that are involved, but all the projects have funding stages in them from beginning to end. So you're not really just getting like a big lump sum of money in the very beginning. So those are just some of the things, that I want people when they're applying for applications to be aware of, and when they're doing their planning around the project.
Thanks, Fadia. Jeremy, if you don't mind, I'm just going to keep the conversation moving for the purposes of time. But I think what we're hearing is projects don't happen in isolation. They're highly coordinated. There's sometimes many partners at the table. And so I want to talk a little bit about partnerships. And many of the programs that DCED administers require a partner or intermediary to apply. And so can you talk, Fadia, a little bit about why that structure exists and why that is actually a strength for projects?
Sure. The structure is used frequently by Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development because it exists for several important reasons that ultimately improve the quality of the project. It has accountability, and it also for public benefit. One of the most important aspects is that it adds oversight and accountability. An intermediary, often a county or municipality, an economic development authority or a nonprofit, they serve as what we call like the steward of the public funds. They ensure that the public funds are used according to the program rules, the procurement and the contracting follow public standards, the reporting, the compliance requirements are met. So it helps reduce the risk of misuse on the projects that are public policy goals. So just not for like private interest. They also really ensure a broader community benefit. Again, helping with that job creation, working not as just one entity, but a part of a larger strategic plan. And, it also helps provide technical expertise. Many of the project sponsors, especially those really small organizations or municipalities, may not have the expertise in like grant compliance or environmental review or project management, or even how to write the application, how to find out what your economic impact measurement are. So having these partners is really important so that these projects can succeed. Requiring a public or nonprofit partner agency like the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development also can confirm that projects support regional or community priorities. So by working in these like multi-layers and having these projects where you're working with the different municipalities at all different levels, just really helps to bring in that accountability. The intermediaries also have professional staff on board, and they have consultants who can help structure the project properly. We can't here at DCD like hold your hand through the entire planning and the project and writing the application, but meeting the funding requirements and so that you can succeed long term. That's really where we rely on our partners. We rely on our partners also to help leverage additional funding. So DCD will come in and be able to put a portion of the award, but there's going to be additional funding that would be necessary. And to be able to assemble those multiple funding sources is really important. And any single project alone may combine state funding or federal grant funding or some type of municipal investment or private capital, or even any type of like capital campaign that you may have going on. So those are all really important reasons why you have to have a collaborative effort.
Thanks, Fadia. And Jeremy and Deb, if you could both, briefly chime in on how this shows up at the local level, from your perspective when we're working with local companies and businesses, to bring funding to the table. Deb, do you want to start? Okay.
Sure. I'll just mention, again, as a certified economic development organization, most of the programs that are administered through DCED have to be applied online through a system called the single application. And because we work so often within that framework, that's where we can really be of assistance to companies. Even if if we're not the applicant, but even if they are the applicant, we're there to help make sure that they, fill the fields in correctly and supply all the supplemental information so that when it does get to the folks who are reviewing it, that it's as complete as possible. And, really that's our role, even though the funds may be coming from the state, is really to help, whether it's a borrower for PETA loans or again, the FSA program or some of these other funds available through DCED. We're there to make that process as easy as possible and make sure that they are putting their best foot forward in terms of the project. So.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. This is a team sport that we need to be able to bring all of these players into the room for these conversations. And so talking to us early allows us to go and do the same thing at the state level. So most of the programs at the state level, I would say, besides LSA and ISRP, most of them are oriented towards $500,000 and above in terms of scale of project. But ISRP, I mean, we submitted a $15,000 grant application last week for a small cleanup that we had to do. So don't exclude yourself automatically just because you think you're not the right scale or you're not the right project. This is still an industry that's very relationship based. And so come and talk to your local partners so that we can talk to the state and say, what's capitalized right now? What is there money for? What are there opportunities for? And have that conversation before you just say no. And don't go to the finish line assuming that they'll say yes because you haven't talked to them in the year leading up, like Fadia said, because that's necessary as well.
Yeah, thank you. And so hopefully there's a baseline understanding about, coordination and partnerships, but I want to just before we head into Q&A, talk a little bit about the capital stack and just break that down for people. And Jeremy, I'm going to ask you to just explain what a capital stack is in plain language and, you know, how do projects move forward with that in place?
Yeah, I mean, so in Berks County right now, market rate for an industrial property is $150 for Class A industrial space. Our industrial park right now, we're coming in at probably, if we were to build the building and everything, soup to nuts, have a building there ready to lease out, market rate, it would probably cost us about 165 to 170 bucks a square foot. Because that scale, while in high demand for our local businesses, is not market ready. The market really can only bear 250,000 square feet and above for industrial building. So a capital stack has to come into play. In the private sector, your capital stack, I mean, it can get more complicated than this, but your capital stack is basically, okay, how much equity do I need to put in as a business owner? How much cash or how much of my own skin in the game do I have to bring to be able to get the bank to give me enough money to get the building built or to get the project done? And maybe there's additional capital that is injected from other investors, and I can make this much more complicated at the private side of the thing. But on the public side, it's almost always more complicated. Your capital stack is going to include different funds from different places that have different requirements. So you might have, for our industrial park, for instance, we used 4 different forms of funding so far, and we're about to venture into 3 more. So in our capital stack, we have to look at, okay, we have grants for the environmental cleanup of the site. We have grants that are partial grants and partial loans, and we need to put that into the site. And all of them have different covenants and different promises. And each of them get us closer and closer to bridging the gap that we have in terms of the market price and what it'll cost us to actually construct it. So when you're going into these projects, you need to be thoughtful in building out, okay, I know I'm going to have ISRP funding for the environmentals. That's going to require a 25% match. So I need to have this much cash, plus I need to have the cash flow timing to be able to pay for it until I get reimbursed. You need to think through all of that. Then you have the next capital stack. Okay, I have this loan on the property. How is that loan secured? Is it secured through the a lien on the land? Is it secured through other means? You have to think through that. And then you have traditional debt financing, which may come into play, especially during the construction phase. And I'm trying to give you all of these things so that you have an idea of what you need to plan for, knowing that all of these are very different. And I would have to go all day to explain how to plan for each one of those. I'm just trying to give you an idea of this is the stuff you need to think about when going into it. So when we went into COVID, for instance, when in February 2020, we had just gotten the bids back to do all of the construction at Berks Park 183 to make it shovel ready. In March, COVID hit, and there was a moratorium on construction for 3 months. That was hard because we had just been about to release the bids, but in fact, for us, it was a godsend because it gave us 3 months where our bidders were still like, yeah, we'll hold these bids because we don't know when we'll have the next job. But it gave us time because at the same time, the stock market tanked 30%. Our financing structure completely blew up. We had to restructure all of our financing for the site, which meant taking one loan and turning it into four loans and having an equity piece. And so you need to be prepared to change on your feet, like we talked about at the beginning of this, but you also need to think through the buckets that are necessary to get up to that number to construct, but not just those buckets, but how you're going to pay them back, how you're going to cash flow it during the time it takes to get repaid. RACP right now, we're seeing that's a state grant. It's a 50-50 match. We're seeing it take a year after the project completes before it pays out. So that means you have a $2 million project, $1 million is RACP and $1 million is your private funds. You have to pay $2 million and you have to cash flow that extra million. Either you take on debt and then you're paying interest costs, or you're losing that $1 million from your bank account, so you're losing the interest earned from it. And you need to figure out how to cash flow that for not just the life of the project, but for a year past the project. So these are all the things you have to think about in your capital stack and planning for how to pay for it once you've gotten it. Once you've gotten on the back of the lion, you need to figure out how to ride it down the road.
Thanks, Jeremy. So panelists, I'm just going to keep this moving, but I think that this may feel a bit overwhelming as you're listening to this, but I want to reiterate that we are here to support you in your projects and can certainly have initial conversations to determine what might be a good fit, eligibility, things like that. Happy to have those initial conversations. I believe Alex put contact information in the chat, so please feel free to reach out. That's the mission of GRCA, is to support the growth of businesses here in Berks County. Is there anything that any of the panelists want to add before and if you have questions, just want to pause there, please put them in the chat. I'm happy to answer them before we wrap up our webinar today.
One thing I was just going to mention is that, I think we said it a few times that an early conversation is really the best place to start. I can guess that Jeremy, Fadi, and I have all had conversations with folks that perhaps have started their project and, maybe halfway through had an unexpected hiccup or, challenges, funding fell through, and it's very difficult to help a project midstream. For all the reasons we talked about, whether it's, the timing of the programs, you've already kind of incurred costs. That's really, heartbreaking sometimes because they're good projects, but they just kind of come to us at the wrong time. So, again, those early conversations, we've talked to folks that, maybe are a year or two out and just really starting to put the pieces together. I would just, can't emphasize that.
Yeah, and I would just like to add that it's really smart to develop a calendar where you're aware of what type of programs are out there and when those windows of financing could potentially open. But always reaching out to, Deb or myself if you have a project that you're thinking about. For me, lots of times people are like, "Oh, I heard there's this program, and how do I get the money?" Well, you have to have a very specific project in mind when you come to us and ask questions. And remember that like the public tools from the state, they're really designed to help fill the strategic gaps in your capital stack. They're not meant to fund the entire project. So really understanding the foundation of how to develop the your stack of a capital stack and understand how the state can help you is important. And it might be overwhelming, but to start making sure you're having those open conversations with any one of us is really the first step. Often, if you come to us and you start talking about a project and you give me a little bit of information, I might just say, "Oh, well, it might fit this program or this program." But if you come to me with, I heard there's funding, that's not really the way to go about, finding resources to help with your strategic plan and things that you'd like to get accomplished. So I think my most important, piece of advice is to really start developing partnerships and asking questions and reaching out before you start just, throwing money at things.
Yes, and we're happy to help navigate with that calendar. We do have a decent handle on application deadlines and open windows. We do have one question. I think, Fadia, this would be for you. For PA sites, you said something about including electricity, how much electricity and power is available um, to be determined to be eligible for a PA site ready location. And they use the example of a large manufacturing facility like the J&J site in Montgomery County.
So often what you do with that is if you would contact me, you would give me the logistics of like how much electricity you need at that site. And then PA sites can be used towards getting that site ready to go if you own that property or if you're looking to buy that property. And a lot of the PA sites is based on a one-on-one kind of project, like really getting into the weeds of the project itself and what the needs are. So that, happy to reach out to me and, we can take a look at it.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions, but I just want to leave everyone with two takeaways. First, most successful economic development projects don't rely on a single tool or funding source. They come together with multiple partners and layered resources. It's a coordinated effort, and you don't have to navigate that complexity on your own. Just want to reiterate that again. We're here to connect the dots, not to create overwhelm. So please consider starting the conversation with us early. There's many team members from GRCA here on this webinar. And I want to thank our panelists for joining us today, Fadia, Jeremy, and Deb. Thank you for sharing your expertise and just giving us a highlight of, what's available and how projects come together. And I again want to thank our sponsors, the Berks County Industrial Development Authority, Berks County Redevelopment Authority, and Gallagher for supporting this series and helping us bring these conversations to the community. And thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate your time and interest in understanding how projects move forward in our community. Again, please feel free to reach out to continue the conversation, and we look forward to our next webinar.